Welcome to this very special edition of The World According to Irina Tsukerman, our very special series on global politics on the KJ Masterclass Live. Irina Tsukerman is a US based national security and human rights lawyer, as well as a renowned geopolitical analyst. Her writings and commentary have appeared in diverse US and international media and have been translated to over a dozen languages. Every fortnight in The World According to Irina Tsukerman, we traverse the geopolitical landscape and delve into pressing international issues and gain insight from Irina's expert perspective. Welcome to the show once again, Irina.
Thank you so much. Always glad to be here.
Welcome. So several big topics again today. Let's start with this Shangri-La dialogue. What is this for a common person who doesn't know what is this Shangri-La dialogue? And Asia's largest defense forum. What does it want? It talks. Shangri-La actually means about some utopian land. What is it that they are trying to achieve with this forum? Help us understand what happened this time.
Like many international gatherings, it brings together leaders of various member states for discussion on top global issues. But it's not just the Asian countries that are attending. This year, of course, the United States was a very prominent participant. The idea is to focus on topics involving Asia, not simply have Asian countries talk to each other. But one country was notably absent from this year's edition, and that was China, which seemed to be a very strong message in light of the tariff and other tensions with the United States and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth's presence at the event. And his remarks seemed to be the biggest focus of this gathering. He was pushing Asian allies into increasing their defense spending. Essentially, this is sending a strong signal that the U.S. cannot be single-handedly taking on the burden in the Pacific. But the question among many allies, such as Taiwan, remains just how much will the U.S. play overall in case of an emergency, and is the U.S. simply trying to make its allies more independent and stronger, and more equal allies, or is it signaling potential withdrawal from this arena, and limiting its future involvement to symbolic backing and economic an economic role? All of these questions continue to be debated because, be it as it may, the U.S. did not address a clear and specific plan for future engagement, leaving these comments as much a mystery to ponder as a signal, as a particular and specific bellwether of what is to come.
Right. And what about China? China did not attend, and as its war with Trump escalates, I thought all problems were sorted and everything, and China and US will be big friends. This time again, just like it was supposed to be with Putin. Help us understand why did China attend and what it all means for everyone, including India.
Well, it is a good question because on the surface, one might add that China missed an opportunity to state its position, and it looked like it was afraid of engaging with the United States being there, but I doubt that is the case, and I doubt that the Chinese defense minister would be particularly concerned about confronting someone like Pete Hegseth, no matter how awkward that might be. China is no stranger to awkward engagements whether with the US or other countries. I think the message was different. The message was that China feels actually quite comfortable not having to be at the gathering while its own actions are being discussed, because China is actually gaining and it knows it. So it doesn't have to attend, it doesn't have to defend its policies, it doesn't have to fight over the other over its neighbors, and it already had a good inkling of what Hegseth was going to say. So clearly Uh, it did not lose out because Hexeth's message was that of demand, not of comfort or promise or any sort of program that provided a specific plan for confronting China or limiting its influence through a common defense posture. So the question, of course, remains: did Hexeth miss out on opportunity to push for a more independent but nevertheless US-backed anti-China defense bloc, or was it something? Or was it that US did not particularly see this gathering as serious enough to warrant anything other than what it has already done with NATO? Is it that US considers all of these Asian countries not serious about their own security and not serious about confronting China? Whatever the case may be, China clearly didn't feel it was losing out by not being there, and that in itself should be a concern.
Absolutely, it should be. So, what are the key takeaways? What should we understand? Was it a failure? Was it a success? Or was it a non-starter? How should we understand this? And what does it all mean for India?
Well, the fact that the biggest issue was what the United States had to say in itself, I think, says a lot about the current state. Many of the Asian countries depend on the U.S. being a reliable and committed ally. The fact that Hexet's words were the focus of this discussion shows a certain level of concern among these states, and India is among them. Despite the fact that India has a very independent defense policy, I think it was looking for a clarity on the direction US was going, because much of what US does that defines the Indo-Pacific strategy, even if particular countries are not necessarily dependent on the US for self-defense. There's a lot more to coordination and cooperation than simply being dependent on US backing. India is one of the bigger countries in the region. It's certainly looking to challenge China in many areas, and I think it was looking for a reassurance that US has a vision for where all of this is going beyond tariffs, and I'm not sure that they got what they were looking for.
Right, right. So one question here, Irina, who is now a closer to US, China or Russia in Putin? Who is closer to, with all these things going on? We'll come to the Putin Trump thing, but I just want to get your mind on this.
Well, I don't know if we can easily separate the two, to be honest, because in so many ways, Russia and China have coordinated their strategy. We saw China engage in the sort of cyber attacks in Europe, in the Czechia, as previously Russia was known for. So I'm wondering whether it's a you can really separate these allies on some level. It is true that there seems to be a great deal of sympathy for Putin for some reason from Donald Trump. And that level of open admiration is, I think, unique even among all the other authoritarian leaders that Trump has praised at various points in time. Nevertheless, I think the relationship with China is strictly economic. The tensions with China are strictly economic. It's about control of resources. It's about a race for primacy in particular areas. I don't think the Trump administration is concerned about China's national security threats all that much, despite the fact that Rubio now said that Chinese students will be kicked out of U.S. universities. That, I think, is less about security concerns and more about competition. That is the undertone that I'm sensing about that, even if the result ends up being the same. It is true that many of the Chinese students sent to the United States are sent with the purpose of intelligence gathering or cultivating ties or somehow undermining U.S. Industries of security. So it's a very reasonable concern, but given the general tone of Rubio's comments in that respect. I'm not sensing that that is the reason why they're being forced out. Um, and given that there are so many other foreign students who are likewise being given the boot aside from China, the message may be getting muddled. Um, if we are looking at the national security angle, if we are looking at other issues, economic, labor related, migration issues, then I think this is not, uh, national security becomes an excuse or cover for the real reasons why all of this is being done.
Absolutely, absolutely. No one seems to be listening to the most powerful person on earth, Donald Trump, at the moment. And that is where, let's go to Putin. Trump calls Putin crazy. First, there was 90-minute call, second 90-minute call, 120 minutes call, and now he calls him crazy. What's happening there? I thought peace was very much round the corner as soon as you took office.
Yeah, I don't think this rhetoric is going to make a difference for Putin. I don't think it's going to make him change his mind. I think the Ukraine operation that we witnessed today is much more likely to give Putin pause for entirely pragmatic logistical reasons than um, Twitter comments by anybody, including Donald Trump. I also don't think, if anything, Putin could use these comments to strengthen his own positions internally by claiming that he's under the attack by the United States, that Trump is emotionally volatile and is not a responsible leader. All of these things actually happen. Putin not helping Donald Trump. And if anything, it shows that Trump's been extremely naive about who Putin is, his motivations, and how he does business. He doesn't seem to understand that giving him endless leeway is not going to bring about the results Trump claims he wants to. I think Trump is very conflicted on what he actually wants to achieve. Simultaneously, he's pursuing this appearance of a peacemaker, but he also cannot let go of the fantasy of if only he does good things for Putin, and they have more in common, then naturally all will be fine with the world, and um, these things will just go away. These problems will just resolve themselves. That is not how it's work, and this cognitive dissonance is not being resolved. Putin was preparing for a major offensive against Ukraine, and Trump was giving him extra time with the sanctions, which only would have led to more people getting killed. Again, the successful Ukrainian operation disrupted a lot of Russia's capabilities. So all of that may fall by the wayside regardless. But if you're talking about Donald Trump's state of mind, he seems to be seeking contradictory results that cannot coexist together. If he's looking for peace but without pressuring Putin, that's never going to happen.
Absolutely, absolutely. So when is the peace happening in Russia-Ukraine war, or will it not happen? And that the Europe itself will have to solve its own problem.
As we speak, Russia and Ukraine are preparing for another round of low-level discussions in Istanbul. According to President Zelensky's latest statement, Russia has yet to present its manifesto to any of the parties involved, whether it's Ukraine, US, or Turkey, which indicates that they're not really serious about the pursuit of peace. They are also probably preparing a response to the major operation that took down at least 4 of their airports and over 40 planes that are basically irreplaceable at this point in time. We're going to have to see what happens in Istanbul, but I doubt that any major concessions will occur. That said, Russia will be hard pressed to make any additional demands from a clear position of military weakness. This operation has to be one of the biggest recent intelligence operational successes in recent years, probably on par, if not bigger, than the Hezbollah operation. The Patriot operation targeting Hezbollah by Israel. The biggest part of this embarrassing fiasco for Russia is that the operation was planned right next door to the FSB building in Moscow, which is, shows the extent of the security failure, among other things, and everyone who was involved was safely evacuated before anything could happen to them, which is yet another success for Ukraine and another embarrassing failure for Russia, um, uh, which has boasted for many decades about its significant intelligence and counterintelligence capabilities, and in fact is known to be quite paranoid, and yet has failed to detect any sign of nefarious adversarial activity. So Istanbul talks should be very interesting. I think Russia is in shock. I think formulating a coherent response, even during the opportunity for dialogue, is going to be complicated for them. I don't think we can expect them to back down, but I also think that they will be in a complicated position to respond to the demand. And I think mm, arguing from a position of, just after this major attack is going to be very difficult for them, and we will see that in the tone tomorrow.
Absolutely, absolutely, Irina. So I'm just wondering, uh, will there be any more further, 90 minutes, 2 hours calls between Putin and Trump soon, or is that over? And how do you think Putin will take it, being called crazy? Zelensky, he heard the word dictator, and then later on at the whatever happened at the White House. How do you think all this is happening now? That whole idea, that big idea about Russia and US starting a new sort of a world order understanding relationship, in that, what is that gone, or is that still open?
I think Putin doesn't particularly care about what Donald Trump thinks of him or what will happen. These deals for him are secondary. He was looking for an economic lifeline for the US, but it's far more important for him to preserve the appearance of being the one setting the tone for this relationship. His response to this verbal attack by Trump was very telling. He explained he basically dismissed it as being emotional, which is an insult. It's essentially saying your president can't control himself. He's reactive, he's not thinking, and he's not capable of responding to our actions with a policy. He has to respond with this verbal outburst. And what I think is deeply fascinating, and I wonder if any Republicans took note of it, is that this is not dissimilar to an incident involving Biden, who was thoroughly criticized for calling, was whether it was she or whether it was Putin, I don't remember which one of those. He called them a dictator at one point and made similar comments in the same tone, and was criticized for not being diplomatic and just not saying things that are not particularly helpful on verbally, instead of creating formulating a strong policy to confront whoever it was. So I think Putin sees these two as two sides of the same coin and will treat them accordingly.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now let's move on from that place to cyber attack on Czech Republic, by allegedly by China. And how should we understand? Means, is this such a big issue? Cyber attacks keep on happening. Why is it suddenly gotten so much of attention? Help us understand this.
There's a couple of things that are different about this incident. First of all, the Czech Republic is a small country. It's not particularly geopolitically, it's not the center. It's not like Poland, which is becoming a huge economic and defense power inside Europe. It's very much in the anti-Russian camp, but again, in terms of geopolitics, it's not one of the leading states in Europe. However, it's strategically important for other reasons. It has had a very important history during the Cold War, and it became a battleground for intelligence services. More recently, it's become an important center of pro-Western intelligence, whereas Poland has become a defense center for the Eastern Front, so to speak. there is something else that's going on that's different about the situation, that it's not one of the main big countries being targeted like France or the United Kingdom that have had a very strong positions against Russia, that are increasingly concerned about Chinese influence. First of all, China has traditionally stayed away from being openly associated with attacks. They tried to rely on state-backed hackers. There were connections found between private companies and the Chinese state or the political parties in charge of it, but even that was indirect. It's still China stick to care to stay behind the scenes. Here, there seems to be a much more obvious attribution to China directly, as if China is no longer looking to hide its things. Another issue is that traditionally, while Chinese cyber attacks are aimed at a mixture of industrial espionage and more political intelligence gathering, they don't unlike Russians, they don't do sabotage for the sake of just simple political messaging. There's always a purpose, whether it's to gain access to money, to political information, or to technologies. So the question, what was the aim of this operation in the Czech Republic? If I had to guess, it may end up having been a joint operation with Russia. First of all, I wouldn't be surprised if Russia played some part in it. Second, likely at least some portion of the cyber attack is political intelligence gathering, most likely, and not simply an attack just to cause problems. Possibly testing capabilities, even that is also a form of intelligence gathering. And another
Right.
issue, it's a sign that China may be starting to take a more aggressive role in these cyber operations, whereas previously Russia led the way in disruptions. Now China is stepping up as well. So that is something to watch out for.
Right. For a common viewer, audience, how would they say, why are we taking China's name here? Why not Russia's name or any other country's name? Why not US name? Are there any concrete science proofs that points to China?
Yes, there were technical signs pointing to China, and each country, even when using independent but state-backed hackers, they have their own signature, their style of penetration, technical style, their reputation, the types of targets that they choose, and all of that points to who is usually behind this operation. And despite the fact that, of course, different groups try to use diverse methods to try to distance themselves from responsibility, they have individual signatures and styles and points of reference points that are very hard to shake. um, so those types of signatures give indication of which country and which intelligence service or political party are behind such attacks. But everyone has come to expect Russia to be behind these sorts of activities. China is mostly relegated to attacks on particular types of businesses or companies, accounts, sometimes also government targets, but most recently it's become a lot more aggressive. It was involved in a major confrontation with the US NSA, and even burned several American officials who were involved in this tit for tat attacks. So we are seeing that China is really becoming also a major threat actor even in Europe, where it's simultaneously trying to push cheap EVs and to do all sorts of business. And NATO in turn has recently, a year or so ago, designated China as a major threat for the first time. So we are seeing that now China is also increasing its visible tensions with the European countries, not just with the United States.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that is where we get France into the picture. A Macron's trip across Asia Pacific. Does it look like that France will replace US as the main Western counterpoint to China? But this seems to have been overtaken by a slap, which we are all hearing about. And Russia said, we don't comment on personal matters, and still said that the wife does not do anything without a reason. Was that a comment or was that not? Help us understand, even for people who have not heard about or known about this.
Well, let's remember that France has had a long history of involvement in the so-called Indochina, otherwise known as Vietnam, but also surrounding areas during the Cold War, during U.S. war in Vietnam. So a lot of what Macron specifically has been doing in the last few years is attempting to restore French involvement in various former colonies and spheres of influence. He made he failed significantly in Africa, and France has gotten kicked out of Western Africa, but he hasn't stopped trying with Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon. In Lebanon, the success has been very mixed because Hezbollah has such a strong control over the country, and um, it just the French influence is going to be limited at this point, regardless. In Syria, he's had a better success, essentially serving as a mediator between the European Union, UK, and the Al Sharaa regime. Now he is attempting to kind of take advantage of the U.S. stepping back from active involvement in various theaters, and to position France as a major security and economic ally to these countries vis-a-vis China, and or just as a simple Western counterpart. Now, uh, France has a fairly aggressive economy despite more recent stagnations. It's a major energy it's big on nuclear energy, something that some of these countries exploring, and of course it's also a growing military power. It's got a nuclear umbrella and is looking to play much more significant and leading defense role in Europe, with the US essentially becoming a less visible partner in NATO. Uh, does it have to what it takes to create its own independent alliance system in the Indo-Pacific and Asian area, where US has struggled with identifying priorities between Quad and assorted economic alliances that have fallen apart, particularly with Trump's involvement? I'm not entirely sure, but Macron was certainly trying to make the case, and that was the point of his regional trip. Although he also raised quite a bit of political controversy by bringing up Gaza, which seemed to be fairly gratuitous, given that those countries may be sympathetic to Gaza, but have other priorities and security priorities. So why start an issue? The reason being simple: France is also trying to take the lead on that issue as well, separately, and he was basically trying to combine two policies into one. He was trying to kill two birds with one stone. Regarding the slap and Russia's position, needless to say, Russia will always try to take advantage of any disturbance, any incident, and any perceived vulnerability to strengthen its own positions. It's no secret that Russia has been targeting Macron and his wife with assorted conspiracy theories and disinformation and cyber operations, and it's been a very protracted battle within France, which has become extremely personal in a way that I think has done more to push France away from Moscow, where, let's recall, Macron initially had somewhat positive relations when he just started, and much more into a completely anti-Moscow camp, to the point that recently the French intelligence leaked about Russia's attempted assassinations of local operatives and political leaders in France. So we are seeing that Russia's comment here is not just a reference point to the specifics of this scandalous episode, but to the fact that it has been instrumentally involved in these personal attacks. And essentially, it was a wink, wink, nudge, nudge that, yes, we've been doing this to you and we will continue. And what are you going to do about it, especially now? Now, it doesn't help that Macron's communications team just completely mishandled this scenario. Initially, they denied anything ever happened. Of course, then the video came back. Then Macron claimed that it was not what it appeared to be, and just caused a lot of awkwardness. But much bigger takeaway is that the enemy is always watching. They're looking for anything to exploit, and so there needs to be a readiness to prepare for both personal, professional, and national vulnerabilities when you're dealing ruthless information warriors such as Russia, where they can't gain access to successful operations or intelligence. They will exploit anything that any opportunity that comes up, and in that way they are quite known for that. The fact that they are using this very cunning language is actually even worse than had they just been more blunt about it, like some of the other um you know critics of Macron and his policies.
Absolutely, absolutely. And let's move on to Gaza now. I thought peace has been restored just one day before Trump's inauguration, but it does not look like now. Humanitarian crisis and Witkoff's new proposal on Gaza rejected by Hamas. Where are we on this? It looks to be a much more difficult and different position than what it looked like with Trump's coming on as president.
Well, I'll tell you something. If there is one country that is doing even worse in public relations and messaging than Macron's team, it's Israel. they they
Yeah,
managed to turn a very successful operation in providing humanitarian aid in conjunction with U.S. backed private groups into a communications disaster, despite the fact that the actual operation appears to be successful in achieving its agenda, which is to distribute aid to Gazans while circumventing Hamas efforts to grab it. Now the question is, why hasn't all of this been done earlier? That's not a question for me. I think it should have been done a lot earlier, and I think Israel and its allies could have saved themselves a lot more trouble and criticism for no reason had they done the wise thing and ensured that the terrorist organization does not get an easy self-own by accusing Israel of blocking it and so forth. Regardless, good thing they started doing it now. There's been some incidents uh, runs on aid, which is to be expected, to be honest, in a chaotic environment. Overall, however, it has been far more successful than anyone is willing to admit. So the criticism of that has actually been fairly limited. What has actually been the bad aspect of it is that Israel has not been successful at getting the story out to begin with. The fact that this is being done at all, that they never actually blocked the aid, and that Hamas figures are completely fabricated, exaggerated, or deliberately create the situation is being deliberately exploited. The same people we're talking about, Macron, Starmer, and even Merz, the new German chancellor, they are not. Israel seems to have lost the plot on how to talk to European leaders without creating a crisis. So now there is a war of words between Netanyahu and Macron. Macron has picked up the Hamas narrative that claims that the humanitarian crisis in Gaza is due to Israel's actions or inaction related to aid. So did the other two. Some of the comments also indicate that these leaders do not understand the goals of the operation in Gaza, because Israel, quite frankly, changed the story on where it's all going on multiple occasions, and the plans are quite a bit unclear. What is clear is that a lot of it could be solved through very traditional diplomacy, just getting direct meetings between the leaders, keeping out assorted parliamentarians who like to shoot their mouths off, and focus on where on coming to a point of agreement and understanding. It does not help that instead of doing these direct meetings, you have random members of the cabinet, like Itamar Ben-Gvir, posting personal pictures of Macron referencing the incident with his wife and tying that to the Gaza commentary. None of that has been good diplomacy. Now, there is another side to this crisis, which is Hamas, which has been completely obstructionist in every possible way and rejected the new proposal, even as Israel accepted it despite very legitimate criticism from even the left of center inside the country, who were very concerned that the plan would prioritize dead hostages over living hostages and essentially give Hamas room to regroup without achieving any of the security goals, just as Israel recently dealt Hamas a major blow by killing Mohammed Sinwar, its latest local operational leader. So,
Uh,
so Witkoff's response to all of that was to scold Hamas on social media, but I don't see any concrete action taken by the U.S. administration to put pressure not only on Hamas but on its backers, such as Qatar, which has, according to leaks, uh, apparently been encouraging Hamas not to cooperate with any of these plans and not to engage in ceasefire or to put down arms to stop fighting. So Qatar has been playing a very clear role in continuing the cycle of violence, and yet there's been not one word of outrage over that by Witkoff or by anybody else.
Absolutely, absolutely. And there was news all about Qatar officials in coordination, some sort of collaboration with some people even in the Israeli government. I mean, that news came in and then it went silent. So it becomes difficult for anyone to understand all those connections with Hamas and also with officials within the Netanyahu government. Does it look like more about Israel or all about Netanyahu by all the actions taken by the present government, Irina?
There's been a lot of scandals that Netanyahu has been involved in related to corruption. Many of them are quite minor and probably would not be taken seriously in most countries around the world, except maybe, Scandinavian countries and places like that tend to be extremely scrupulous when it comes to minor financial dealings. But in most places around the world, these things would not qualify as major scandals. However, the one scandal that I think is very legitimate, it's his attempt to discredit his own officials, including some of the ones he either appointed or who were essentially in the right-wing camp, and who were stymieing some of his initiatives, which were criticized for a variety of reasons, such as the judiciary reform efforts, such as his efforts to block for entirely political reasons to block the participation of the more religious segments of the population in military draft. Uh, and on top of that, it appears that some of the people around Netanyahu were taking bribes from Qatar to enhance Qatar's image after October 7th and to also spread other types of propaganda, such as anti-Egypt stories in the media. Some of these individuals appear to be close to other controversial leaders, such as Serbia's pro-Russian President Vucic, and one of these people is under investigation related to Qatargate, and here we see increasing number of people from Netanyahu's camps essentially pose with Vucic, despite the fact that all these connections, you know, are highly questionable. So Netanyahu himself has actually also caused a great deal of controversy recently with comments denying Qatar's connection to October 7th attacks and claiming that Hamas, a very unsophisticated actor, was independently responsible and that Qatar had nothing to do with that, which is just simply not true. And it's not true. We know it's not true because the Israeli intelligence accused Qatar quite openly of playing a role in October 7th, which is very rare for the intelligence agency to actually call out a state actor in public like that. So the amount of evidence must have been overwhelming for that to happen. The fact that Netanyahu is denying it after everything that came out and after, frankly, statements from Qatar's own government are essentially celebrating the occasion on media and praising Sheikh Hamosa is one of the people who basically praised October 7th. Some of the other ones praised Sinwar and so forth. It's really raises a lot of questions about why he's covering for Qatar, and is there any credibility to the idea that it's not just his the people around him, but he himself may have been implicated in some bribery related to Qatar.
Absolutely, absolutely. And talking of Qatar, and it's about the jet plane. And every time I think I'll move on away from a news about Mr. Trump, he comes into the picture. Jet plane scandal escalates. Doha claims Trump demanded the plane for free. It's been grounded even before flying. What's happening with this? Why is this is turning into a big scandal? And what is Mr. Trump's response here on this?
Well, first of all, it turns out that far from being a random gift from Qataris, it seems that Trump actually demanded it as a as a favor or bribe for who knows what in exchange. And when that story came out from Doha, the White House did not issue denials, which is in itself very telling. Moreover, the Qataris demanded that the U.S. acknowledge that upon receiving the plane, it becomes the U.S. responsibility, and what happens to the plane after the defense secretary receives it, whether it goes to the presidential library, to whoever, that's none of their concern, which is, again, the scandal has become so toxic that even the Qataris, who are not generally particularly scrupulous about their reputations in that regard, seem to be trying to distance themselves from this whole affair, and they're probably regretting getting involved in this in the first place. But as for the plane itself, it's a huge problem. First of all, refurbishing it, it would take probably hundreds of millions of dollars, and it would take years, and it would not be ready by the time Trump even leaves office. So, while the other issue is that you actually need two of these planes for it to be safe enough to fly, because there are actually two Air Force One planes, because no one's supposed to know which one the president is actually on at any given point in time. And another issue, it's not clear whether it's technically possible to turn this plane into something that is appropriate to act as a presidential airplane. So this this gift, maybe more trouble than it's worth, even for $400 million.
Yeah, so I'm trying to understand why would the president of United States ask for a plane like this, that too from another country, as a gift? Means I'm still trying, as a common person, how would you want to explain or understand this particular thing, Irina? It's like I'm going to a friend's place and I tell them, I like your horse, you give me your horse. And it's almost like a very old horse. Tell me about this plane. Let's focus on the plane.
Well, the plane is a huge and luxurious plane. It belongs to the royal family. They essentially were trying to get rid of it for years, but nobody would buy them because it's so expensive. And the emir actually ended up buying an even more luxurious plane, given that this one is called a flying palace. I can only imagine what what the other one is like. A few pictures from this plane obviously show a very luxurious plane that I think most people can't even really imagine. Quite frankly, the story is much simpler than anyone would like to admit. Trump saw these luxury. Trump has always had an obsession with big planes. This is not new. But after seeing during his first term in office that the Gulf royals tend to fly in very luxurious planes, he became obsessed and upset that American leaders don't have planes like that. Even if they have private planes, they're generally much more businesslike and constrained. So this is what prompted this whole outcome. And in his second term, with nothing left to lose, I think he saw his chance to make his dream come true.
Absolutely. Dream come too, but about the tariffs here. Judges are rejecting his tariffs here, and some are accepting, some are rejecting. I don't know whether this is the end of it. Where do we stand in this? Yeah, lots of countries are watching this very closely.
Two federal courts rejected the tariffs essentially for overstepping his executive authority. This is a congressional issue, and the president cannot, even if Congress voluntarily gave up its power, still the executive branch cannot forcefully enforce these tariffs in such a broad manner. That was basically the finding of two federal courts. The administration filed an appeal, and the ruling by the courts was not substantive. It was basically allowing 10 days for the tariffs to remain in place while that appeal is being filed. But it's a very technical decision. It's not a decision on the merits. It's not contradicting the two previous courts. It's a procedural decision to allow the stay until the issue is resolved in the appeals court. And it's not going to be an extensive appeals process. It's just going to be a review whether either of the previous courts made any substantive mistakes in the way they formed their opinion, which is highly unlikely because one of those federal courts is the U.S. Trade Court, International Trade Court, and they specialize in these issues. So the chances of them making a mistake on something so basic is not very high.
Absolutely, absolutely. And talking of Trump administration, must tenure as head of Doge comes to an end. What do we understand? Is Doge effort over? All those people who were fired will be back? How should we understand? Billions and trillions saved? Where do we stand on this? Where does Musk go? Where does Trump go on this? Is the department closed now, or it still works?
Officially, it's still there, although people expect it not to be very active after Musk's departure. But on the other hand, it's not clear where Musk is fully going away or not. He is trying to desperately salvage the situation in Tesla, where the board has finally lost patience with him and demanded that he's there at least 40 hours a week. At the same time, he managed to pick fights with absolutely everybody in the administration and even had major disagreements with Trump over the tariffs issue and some of the other issues. On the other hand, Elon Musk is himself $170 billion wealthier than before he joined up with Trump. He also had an opportunity to do lots of drugs, as it appears from more recent reports, and had a very good time doing what he's doing. As for whether Doge accomplished its purpose, no, it absolutely did not. For all the quote-unquote savings that it did, the budget is set to increase by $5 trillion, which means increased spending, canceling out any minor savings previously. Multiple programs were virtually killed or dismantled or significantly damaged and causing assorted major repercussions around the world, from literal deaths due to medical humanitarian crisis in African countries to a simple loss of face and influence based on the terminated programs and firings, and loss of very flexible instruments of power that the administration could have been used to send its own message abroad. So what we are seeing is a complete failure. I think those of us who were cynical from the outstart about how all of this would be executed see it as a power grab that gives some people an opportunity to make money or to make themselves look good or to use the opportunity to get government contracts, and not much else has been accomplished that's positive, and that couldn't have been done in some other way.
Right. So what did America, US get out of this experiment? What did Trump get out of this experiment? What did Musk get out of this experiment?
Well, for Musk, it was very obvious a power play, an opportunity to get more government contracts, to get a bigger stage and influence. It backfired because he himself is a very difficult person to work with, and he just couldn't stick. He was distracted. He was not professional. He was doing drugs. He was fighting and alienating even his own supporters, and causing massive scandals and using questionable methods. But he made money. He got what he wanted, at least for a time, and he still has his foot in the door, so it's not like he's being completely kicked out. Regarding Trump, for Trump, it was always about making himself look good and also helping his loyal officials and appearing to be carrying out campaign promises. And I think many people don't want to admit that it was not just a waste of time, money, and resources, but actually caused massive damage. People don't want to admit to it because so many of them were hoping that Doge would turn out the instrument that would solve all the budgetary problems, all the corruption problems in the government. Some of them real, some of them imaginary, but they thought it would be much bigger than what it turned out to be. And they don't want to admit that they were also wrong about the two people that they idolized and counted on, which is Donald Trump and Elon Musk, both of whom did not take this seriously enough to actually make it successful in by any definition, including their own. They failed to make the savings that they promised, even regardless of the substance of how those savings came about. Musk initially promised $2 trillion in savings or more, and it came down to a couple of hundred, billion that could have been that were, as I said, canceled out by the overall increase in spending.
Right, right. And what about Musk's role? As he was meeting a lot of international leaders as part of, whether it was official, unofficial, whether legitimate, not legitimate, we do not know. But that role seems to be also over. How do you think all those he interacted with must be looking at it?
Well, to be honest, I think there's a good reason why India did not rush into into major contracts with him, and it's not only because of some technical legal changes. I think they just don't trust him and his reputation, and they watched how he insinuated himself in the process and questioned whether he would stick around long enough to make it worth their while. And obviously, those concerns turned out to be very legitimate. Moreover, now it comes out that during the trip to Saudi Arabia, he actually tried to sabotage some Othman's open AI deals with the Saudi government, which also does not make him look good. I mean, of course, there's competition between different businesses, but there's ways of doing it that's legitimate, and there's ways of coming across as petty, vindictive, and just envious, and that's exactly what came out of that. So I don't know what Musk will get out of the Saudis. He attempted to launch Tesla there after many years of feuding with the government, but I don't think that relationship is ever going to flourish quite as much as some of the other businesses that are entering the market there.
Absolutely, absolutely. Lots of difficulties for Donald Trump, but lots of one thing he seems to be talking about is that India Pakistan, that he was able to control this whole possible nuclear conflagration between India and Pakistan, and he's talking about trade. India trade deal with India, and possibly the Pakistan representative will also be. Help us understand what is Trump trying to achieve. What is this whole deal about India, and why Pakistan coming in later on?
I mean, I think this is just yet another instance of Trump trying to position himself as the ultimate deal maker and peacemaker all rolled into one, especially after the failures with regard to Gaza and Ukraine, and North Korea. Very mixed results on his dealings with Iran, in the highlighting the fact that now it turns out that they're continuing to enrich uranium even as they talk about making a deal. None of that bodes well for the peace process, to put it mildly. So now he's taking up another cause which has now appeared to be contained, at least for the time being, and trying to take credit and build on that by taking it into a more economic direction. I really don't think he knows very much about either country, frankly, or their relationship, or the history of distrust, or the underlying situation with the current tensions and conflict, and why making a trade deal of the sort he's imagining is going to be extremely complicated. And that's me being very optimistic and diplomatic here. I do think that he's also that his comments about the nuclear disaster are more aimed at his followers than at the general public. He knows that most of these people probably don't know much about what went on behind the scenes, and probably hearing threats from Pakistan, or being aware of previous close calls between the two countries, just assume naturally that this is a real threat. I personally did not think that in this particular instance it would ever get as far as that. I didn't think that was even the objective of even the villainous actors who were trying to start the whole thing. I think the objectives were quite different. I think the situation is still going to be playing out for a long time for completely different reasons. But for Trump, it's as usual just an effort to put himself in the center of the story. I don't think much will come out of it, but I also don't think it will not necessarily harm anybody. I just don't think it's going to work.
Absolutely, absolutely. Lots of happening in the world of global politics. Lots of things happening in the world of Donald Trump. And I'm sure every 2 weeks, that's why we come to you and help us understand, make sense of it all. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of The World According to Irina Tsukerman on the KJ Masterclass Live. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.
Thank you so much. It was great as usual.